Fox News alert: President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, and his business associate, Rick Gates, both turning themselves in to the FBI today, expected to make an initial appearance at district court in the next hour. The indictment, unsealed against them, contains 12 counts, including conspiracy against the United States. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith. Here today, Harris Faulkner, the editor of townhall.com. Katie Pavlich is here, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, also from FBN, the co-host of After the Bell, and host of Forbes on Fox. David Asman is here, and he is outnumbered on what has turned out to be a busy start to the week.
It sure is.
Good to have you here, sir.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
All right, let's dive right in. New details coming in on the first charges in special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible ties between the Trump presidential campaign and Russia. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort and his business partner Rick Gates indicted by a federal grand jury on 12 counts, including conspiracy against the United States and conspiracy to launder money. Our own Judge Andrew Napolitano read the indictment. He told me earlier on America's Newsroom what he finds most troubling about the case against Manafort.
The allegations continue to September of 2016, meaning during the time that Paul Manafort was the chair or chief executive officer, I'm not sure what the title was, of Donald Trump's campaign, he was still, according to the government, engaged in this massive money laundering fraud and was serving as an agent of a foreign government, the government of the Ukraine, without ever having informed the United States of America, as he's obliged to do under the law.
Meantime, there is growing concern over who leaked the information that the indictment was coming. Fox has learned it likely came from either the Office of the Special Counsel, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's office, or the court itself. Here's New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
There are very strict criminal laws about disclosing grand jury information. Now, depending upon who disclosed this to CNN, it could be a crime. We have to have the public have confidence in the fact that the grand jury system is secret and, as a result, fair. But again, we don't know who leaked it to CNN. It would be a crime if prosecutors or agents leaked it.
Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is live from the district court. James.
Sandra, good afternoon. Great publicity had attended the filing of these two indictments that ultimately turned out to be unrelated to allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. But with exceptional stealth, special counsel Robert Mueller and his team arranged for the unsealing of a guilty plea in the Russia case, just disclosed about an hour ago, as if to dispel any perception that the probe has strayed too far afield. George Papadopoulos, a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, pleaded guilty earlier this month to lying to FBI special agents during questioning that took place just 1 week after the inauguration. Papadopoulos acknowledged misleading the agents about when he had contacts with a professor overseas and others, boasting of their contacts inside the Kremlin, including a Russian woman whom Papadopoulos believed to be the niece of Vladimir Putin. Papadopoulos falsely told the agents that these contacts had occurred prior to his service with the campaign. The court documents state, quote, "The professor told defendant Papadopoulos, as defendant Papadopoulos later described to the FBI, that they, meaning the Russians, have dirt on her, meaning Hillary Clinton. The Russians had emails of Clinton. They have thousands of emails." Following that conversation, the court documents continue, defendant Papadopoulos continued to correspond with campaign officials and continued to communicate with the professor and the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs connection in an effort to arrange a meeting between the campaign and the Russian government, unquote. However, these court documents also make clear that the Trump campaign rebuffed this effort by the Russians working through Papadopoulos to set up a meeting with the candidate himself. An unnamed senior campaign official is quoted in these documents as having written, quote, "We need someone to communicate that DT, meaning Donald Trump, is not doing these trips," unquote. Now, the news follows the surrender to federal authorities this morning of Manafort, the former Trump campaign manager. He and his associate, Rick Gates, are due in this court about 90 minutes from now to enter pleas to a dozen counts of alleged financial crimes, including money laundering and tax evasion, stemming from Manafort's lobbying work for Ukrainian interests from 2006 to 2015. "Sorry," President Trump tweeted in response, "but this is years ago, before Paul Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. Why aren't crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus?" Followed by 5 question marks. And the president added, also, "There is no collusion." So it's the first guilty plea secured by the special counsel in an investigation that has gone on for more than a year and a half, and it suggests that perhaps there will be more to come. One thing we can glean from these documents is that Mr. Papadopoulos' sentencing is going to be conditioned on how much he cooperates with the special counsel moving forward. Sandra.
Are we likely to get a look at Paul Manafort when he enters the court there in a little bit, James?
Hard to say. Sometimes private entrances are arranged, but perhaps if the special counsel is feeling particularly aggrieved about the allegations against Mr. Manafort, he may require Mr. Manafort to perform what is colloquially known as a perp walk, surrounded by cameras, the moment recorded for posterity.
All right, James, I'm going to open up for any questions from my colleagues.
Hey, James, it's Harris. Good to see you.
Hey.
Political analyst Eric Erickson is writing today that people may jump to the conclusion because of the role that Paul Manafort played on the Trump campaign that there's some connection there. And you just showed us the tweet where the president is saying don't jump to that conclusion. But what Erickson is saying is that when you look at the actual wording of the indictment, the two are very separate. And it isn't just the timing that some of these things happened before Manafort worked on the campaign, but they're just very different. They don't implicate the White House as far as he can see. What are you hearing?
Well, if you review the indictment of Mr. Manafort and Gates, it's very clear that the charges do not relate to any allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. Rather, they relate to Mr. Manafort's and Gates' work together on a lobbying campaign on behalf of Ukrainian interests, again, from 2006 to 2015. So it's just totally unrelated. What strikes me as especially savvy about the special counsel's work today is that in addition to unsealing those indictments, he also chose this moment when he could probably have done so at any point since October 5 or at any time going forward to unseal this guilty plea by Mr. Papadopoulos, as if to say to the public, without saying in so many words, look at what we're doing. It's not just far afield and looking at the tax returns of people who were connected to Mr. Trump later on in time from 10 years ago. We're also looking at the Russia collusion angle. And it's interesting that Mr. Papadopoulos probably didn't do anything wrong in all those emails and those contacts with people he believed to have dirt on Hillary Clinton, but he did, by his own admission, lie to FBI officers about when and the circumstances under which those contacts occurred.
James, can I ask you a question? This is David Asman about previous special prosecutors and the way they leak information to parties that they think will be somewhat sympathetic to their cause. I was working for the Wall Street Journal when Ken Starr was investigating Whitewater and President Clinton. Of course, that led to an impeachment. They knew, the prosecutor's office knew that we were somewhat sympathetic to their cause because the Journal had been doing a lot of reports on Whitewater. We were privy to a lot of information. I won't say from whom it came, but it was published both on the news and the editorial side. The fact that CNN were the first people to get the information from the prosecutor's office, I think is very interesting. It kind of shows that they are sort of linked in a certain way, are they not, towards getting something on the Trump administration.
I think we have to be very careful, about ascribing responsibility or culpability for the leak of this secret grand jury information to the prosecutor's office or anywhere else at this point. We just don't have the facts about where CNN obtained that information. But be not mistaken about it. If the activities of Paul Manafort a decade ago fall within the purview of Special Counsel Mueller, presumably he will not regard it as far afield for him to be investigating who leaked word of these indictments in the case that he's prosecuting. So this should properly also fall under his investigatory lens. But one point still to be made about that, since we're also delving back into history, David, that there is a precedent for this kind of information leaking, for the grand jury process to be compromised. Woodward and Bernstein, the famous reporting duo from the Washington Post, back when they were unraveling the Watergate cover-up, Bernstein himself interviewed a grand juror in that process, but misled the readers of All the President's Men and the Washington Post for decades about this, and it didn't really come to light or get confirmed until 2012, when a biographer of Ben Bradlee, the editor of Woodward and Bernstein, was published based on files of Ben Bradlee's that showed that, in fact, Carl Bernstein did interview a grand juror and did mislead his readers about that.
Our great historian, James Rosen.
James
Good stuff.
Rosen.
Wow. Drop that mic, my friend. Just
All right.
drop it.
I'm sure we'll see a bit more of you later as they are expected to arrive at the courthouse shortly. I'm going to open this up to Katie Pavlich now because I walked into the green room before the show and you were knee deep in these indictments. You said you're into this. What stands out the most to you as you go through these?
Well, it's never a good day when your former campaign manager gets indicted on 12 counts of felonies. But it is important, as we just went over with James, to point out that there is not a single sentence, not a single word in the indictment that refers to the campaign. Now, the left has been all over the Trump campaign for months about Russian collusion. That's not what this is. This indictment is all about Paul Manafort's shady business dealings, about him lying to federal agents about where he was putting money, his business partner being all in on it as well, tax evasion. I mean, this is about his private business, which has gotten him in trouble. And as you saw, the president is trying to distance himself from it. But the other thing that is important here that does have to do with the campaign is the plea deal that was made with this 30-year-old Trump campaign advisor. Now, again, he was accused of lying to federal agents about setting up meetings. He is not in legal trouble for trying to set them up, and it should be noted that nobody from the campaign actually attended any meetings that he was trying to set up in Russia.
Well, I think it's also, too, what James said. He said, well, there wouldn't have been anything wrong with what he did, but then he lied about it, which is a reflexive action of some when they think that, oh, my goodness, are they asking me, presuming that I've done something wrong? And that's sometimes what can happen to you when you don't have legal counsel. I don't know what his situation was at the time when he was asked. But sometimes that can and now it's the lie that has him in hot water.
Or when you're trying to protect someone else, which in the case of Paul Manafort is trying to protect Paul Manafort. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see if what Mueller's team is doing is putting the squeeze on some of those accounts, because what Paul Manafort loves is money and being in proximity to power. So if they seize those assets, those offshore accounts where he allegedly laundered millions and millions of dollars, absolutely, are they doing that and putting that kind of pressure on him in order to get him to spill on the next person and whoever else they seek in those indictments?
Can I just say the one thing that's interesting about the Papadopoulos guy and his guilty plea is what James had said is that the prosecutor's office is trying to prove that they haven't thrown such a wide net dealing with things that happened way before Manafort ever dealt with Donald Trump as a campaign chairman, that they want to show that they're looking into stuff. Well, I wonder about fusion GPS. I know we're going to be talking about this later, but there's fusion GPS, there's Uranium One. There are a whole lot of Russiagate issues about which Robert Mueller should be looking into. If his main interest is looking into how Russia was affecting our election campaign on both sides, he's got to look at both sides. And so far, there's no indication he's been doing that.
One thing that's come up that I was kind of curious about. So our team has been reporting this morning that Paul Manafort was caught off guard by this, that he was completely shocked that anything like this was coming down. Do you remember the raid?
This is
that they moved on his home?
Predictable thing.
Not great. I mean, it got really chippy with investigators. And so he must have known. He must have said something might be coming.
Absolutely. And what did they seize? Financial documents, tax information.
Those wire transfers in 2012.
I feel like we need to broaden this out, though, and ask the question, what does this mean politically? How does this affect the Trump agenda, end of day?
Well, first I want to say you made the point that the special counsel, there's no evidence of them investigating the Uranium One deal. There actually is. Special counsel Mueller is now investigating the Podesta group, John Podesta's brother. So I think we have to clear that up because he is investigating things that we're not maybe aware of yet, but he certainly is going after that as something that is in his interest. How this affects the president politically, he should stay away from this. He should take his own point and take its advice in the sense that he says it happened before. It has nothing to do with the White House. Paul Manafort never worked in the administration. He is not a government official. It's not their problem to deal with. Move on and focus on.
By the way, can I just say one thing, which is that when Bill Clinton was going through the process that led to his impeachment by Congress, he did a lot of things like welfare reform. He actually passed a cut in the capital gains tax. We're embroiled right now in trying to cut taxes. So you can get things done while this process is going on.
The conversation has changed this Monday, right? I mean, it was all the dossier, Uranium One, Hillary Clinton, the Democrats last week, and we're in a completely different mode this morning.
Maybe that's not coincidental.
Just pointing out. As we wait, former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort's initial court appearance happening at any moment this afternoon. Some serious serious questions for special counsel Robert Mueller over whether he should still be leading the Russia probe. There are calls for him to testify about his role as FBI director during the controversial Russia Uranium One deal. As one columnist says, he should resign. We'll debate. Plus, some lawmakers are demanding answers now that we know Hillary Clinton and the DNC helped fund that dossier on President Trump and Russia. They want top Democrats who denied knowledge of the payments for the dossier to be interviewed again. The political fallout.
But the R's, Republicans, are now fighting back like never before. There is so much guilt by Democrats, Clinton, and now the facts are pouring out. Do something! Exclamation point, end of quote. End of tweet. Ty Cobb, a member of Trump's legal team, says in a statement, the president's comments today are unrelated to the activities of the special counsel with whom he continues to cooperate. But former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, says Robert Mueller is going to be watching everything the president does, including what he tweets.
I would look for a couple of things. One, whether or not Donald Trump has some reaction and talks in a way that could be used against him in the future, because Bob Mueller would do that. And the second thing I would look at is to see if the President of the United States is sending some kind of message to the potential defendant or other witnesses.
So, Sandra, we were just talking about the fact that political analyst Larry Sabato says, what should the president do?
Said, be quiet. Do not tweet. Don't even comment on this. He said that last hour on Fox News Channel.
Yeah, and part of the reason, David, I mean, just to kind of keep a gate, if you will, on what's out there, but also legally speaking, it becomes material potentially in a case.
Well,
so
and
you
again,
just don't want to spit that out.
Think of what happened to Bill Clinton. Some of the statements that he made about that woman, Monica Lewinsky, which actually led to his impeachment, led to him being interviewed in a format which led to his impeachment specifically because he was found to be lying under oath.
Yeah.
And so anything the president says now can be used by the special prosecutor to bring him in for questioning, under oath he'd be forced to say things that may or may not be completely true.
Well, and isn't the point here, too, Katie, that this is so far afield from where it started that we know that that is within his right to do as special counsel, but a propensity for this particular
Well, the
prosecutor.
president can actually use the special counsel to his advantage in the sense that he can say, a special counsel has been appointed. We have plenty of lawyers working on it. If you're interested in it, call the special counsel's office. They have a public relations person who will answer all of your questions. And I think today when Sarah Sanders comes to the lectern in the White House press briefing room, that is probably what she will say. She will refer all the questions about this to the Justice Department, as she should. That's exactly where it belongs.
Kennedy?
No, I actually understand the president's frustration here, because if you feel like you haven't done anything wrong and you feel like there are great and powerful forces working against you, and you know his greatest political opponent, Hillary Clinton, he feels like she has done so much wrong and has gotten off scot-free and will probably never meet real justice in her lifetime. I understand that, and I understand that urge to protect what you've worked very hard for. Having said that, you can do more damage to yourself and to your administration by feeding those impulses for justice in the moment.
Well, and the point that you made, David, too, it isn't just tweeting, but it's what if you make a mistake. You can't. You can't go deleting it.
Well, you can make mistakes in tweets, but what you say in tweets could be used by the special prosecutor to bring you under questioning. And again, President Trump is not a politician. Bill Clinton was a professional politician, grade A professional politician, and he made mistakes.
Right,
so
exactly.
that led to his being questioned.
But him being not
oath.
a politician is why Manafort was there in the first place.
Right,
People like
right,
Manafort are attracted to that because think about it.
But he was fired.
These dynasties and institutions and politics, those teams have been put together for years.
But
and
Manafort was fired, it must be remembered, by the Trump campaign because of the fact that he lied to them. So they had the good sense to fire the guy.
I'm trying to think, Katie, of all the times since he has been president, that Trump was warned, don't respond,
Right.
don't say anything, be quiet. And
Yeah.
if he ever really did just that.
Well,
I mean, this case is different because you're talking about the legality.
Right. I was just
of
going to
it.
say, there are political moments where he says things where Republicans wish that he wouldn't. That is not really an issue. But when it comes to the legality of what the special counsel is investigating, he does have the potential to get himself in trouble because he doesn't know the scope of the special investigation.
But don't
there
you
are
think-
many
Well, and
avenues
don't
he
you
could
think-
stumble into on accident by simply talking about things he is unaware
Well, and
of.
even the
And it just
investigation-
is a distraction to his agenda.
It
Tax reform
doesn't
should be
know
coming
its
out this
own
week.
scope at this point because the special counsel can go in any direction that he feels
Right.
he needs to go in. I want to talk money for just a second,
Okay.
particularly
All
with
right.
you. So Larry Sabato, I want to bring him up again, political analyst who was on Fox News about an hour ago, said something I thought was very astute. He said, nothing happens in a vacuum. There's always a constellation out there. He said that the president needs to concentrate on the other things that are in the universe, like the great economy right now, like that 3% in GDP that we just saw on Friday, which was the greatest point of growth consecutive 2 quarters since 2014.
And he said he was going to do it, and he did it. I mean, he fulfilled a campaign
So he
promise.
should send, according to Sabato, every tweet should be about how great the economy is.
Well,
right
I'm
now.
just wondering whether Ty Cobb, his attorney, what Ty Cobb said to the president after he saw the tweets yesterday. I'm sure that he said, Mr. President, I understand the frustrations that Kennedy was just talking about, but please don't do this. Please come to me first.
Yeah.
And who has had that power before? General Kelly, everybody thought was going to have some
everybody
power.
close to him has had the opportunity.
The opportunity, but not the power to
do
stop
it.
them. Now is the time when he's got to take legal advice very seriously because he does have all kinds of things in the agenda to get through. By the way, as I mentioned before, Clinton got a lot of things done while he was under investigation. This president can get a lot of things done
We could see
if he
tax reform.
concentrates.
Yeah.
Tax reform was
short
done during
order.
the Clinton administration while he was being investigated
Yeah, and
by
I think
Ken
so
Starr.
far everything that we've
president is
seen,
not under
none of this
investigation. That has
compromises
not been printed.
how his base feels about him.
Right.
So he can continue, and you're absolutely right. He should tout the good news that's coming out economically.
Consumer
and then,
confidence just
But
came out
I
today.
do want to
Way
make sure
big,
that we
big, big
reiterate the
consumer
point. Unless there has been a major change in the last little while, we know that it has not been reported or printed that the president in any way, shape, or form is under investigation with this.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on. As we await former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort's first court appearance on the first charges in Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, what about the Democrats and their involvement in now that infamous Trump dossier during the campaign? Why a key Republican wants Hillary Clinton's top lieutenants to return to the Hill? For some questions.
This is a Fox News alert as we learn more about indictments handed down today in special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. Republicans and the White House demanding answers following the bombshell revelation that Hillary Clinton's camp and the DNC helped fund a dossier containing damaging claims about President Trump. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders tweeting, quote, Clinton's spokesman just said he's damn glad Clinton campaign colluded with Russia to spread disinformation about the president and influence the election. The evidence, Clinton campaign, DNC, and Russia colluded to influence the election is indisputable. Former Clinton campaign chair John Podesta and former DNC chief Debbie Wasserman Schultz have separately denied knowing of the dossier's funding to congressional investigators. But Republican Senator Susan Collins saying it is imperative that the two be recalled for questioning in light of the new findings. Watch.
They absolutely need to be recalled. It's difficult to imagine that a campaign chairman, that the head of the DNC would not know of an expenditure of this magnitude and significance, but perhaps there's something more going on here.
Perhaps. But the ranking Democrat on House Intel, Adam Schiff, says the key issue here is not who paid for it. Listen to this.
I certainly would have, liked to know who paid for it earlier, but nonetheless, that's just one factor to be considered. It doesn't answer the ultimate question, which is how much of the work is accurate, how much of it is true. And my colleagues don't seem particularly interested in that question, but that is really the most important question for the American people.
So if it's true, the means and payment are meaningless.
Well, of course, his Democratic colleagues aren't interested in whether or not the Democratic Party was directly involved in paying. But the fact is, whoever paid for this dossier was played by the Russians. I think everybody now agrees that at least most of the stuff that was in that Trump dossier was made up and presumably by people, sources in the Kremlin. The point is that is at the heart of Russiagate. Russia was out to destroy our confidence in our democratic system, whether it was the Democrats they were playing or the Republicans.
True.
That's what was going on with Russiagate. That's why I hope Mueller is looking at all sides of it, not just the Republican side, but also the Democratic.
Let me ask you a question, Katie, because if you're a prosecutor, do you go to the jury and say, hey, some of our evidence wasn't tampered with? So just pay attention to that stuff.
Just pay attention to
that's
stuff.
essentially what Adam Schiff is asking the public and, perhaps special counsel in the future.
Oh, come on. For him to
elements of the dossier.
Yeah, for him to say that he doesn't really care who paid for it doesn't really matter at this point. If the shoe was on the other foot, if the Trump campaign had paid...
Are you trying to say what difference does it make?
What difference does it make? Absolutely. But to your point about the special counsel, I do think that they're looking at an extensive web of this, not just the Trump campaign, but also the Clinton campaign.
That would be the responsible thing to do. And I think, Kennedy, you said it best during the commercial. It is a thirst for justice.
Well, and there are serious...
Right? And if they're thirsty for justice, I'm paraphrasing you now. You weren't nearly so thirsty. but if they are, then they'll get to all of it.
But there are very, very serious questions here about this dossier. Let's not forget that this was published in January of 2017 by BuzzFeed News. It was sent to a number of other reporters who refused to publish it because they didn't think there was anything to verify what was in it. And it was far too salacious to just throw out into the universe. And the question is now, did the FBI use this as part of their investigation into the campaign? And did it trigger the unmasking of Obama White House officials of Trump campaign officials?
So what if the answer is yes? So what if the answer is yes?
Then the Justice Department and the special counsel is going to have to deal with the legality of those issues.
People are still left wondering if anybody would ever actually be held accountable, though.
Well, that's absolutely right. So now that we see these indictments come down, it's algebra. What you do on one side, you have to do to the other. And that's where justice has to be agnostic. But if we are drawing the line and you are not allowed to accept payments from foreign entities and, launder them and not claim them, which is allegedly what Paul Manafort and Rick Gates did, that's wrong. But if you're also paying a British agent, former foreign officer who is working with the Russian government and paying him millions and millions of dollars, or paying a company and a law firm millions of dollars to access that information, how is one wrong and the other is not?
And to your point, this indictment really focuses on what Manafort did, or what they claim Manafort did, in terms of not registering as a foreign agent for a foreign government. Fusion GPS, which is the company behind the Trump dossier, never registered as a foreign agency, or the individuals as a foreign agent, particularly Glenn Simpson, the guy who started it. If, in fact, there is some money trail from Russia to Fusion GPS, somebody at Fusion GPS is going to jail. And that has to be asked, and hopefully Robert Mueller can ask that question.
Right. Well, and on the political end of it, it's not necessarily about where people are getting their opposition research, as Democrats are trying to say this is. It's all about accusing the Trump campaign of collusion for months and months, while the Hillary Clinton campaign sat on the fact that they paid for this dossier, while the Senate Intelligence Committee gets up and does a press conference and says, we just need to know who paid for this dossier so we can go forward with our investigation. And they said nothing until Fusion GPS was subpoenaed and had to admit that they paid for it. So they knew all about this, and they're willing to let these investigations go forward without the cooperation that they would expect from the other side.
I also find it interesting that as they drill down on this, it would seem that the Hillary Clinton campaign did not circulate this information. They gave it to certain members of the media, but it didn't go among the campaign members.
That's exactly...
Was that because they already had found some things that they suspected, because they were so salacious that they might have been made up, or that they just weren't useful because of their salaciousness?
Well, it's also because they have their contacts in the press. I think, frankly, it's the way that this indictment was sent out, too.
Well, I mean, what we see in politics now is that you win by any means necessary. And Brian Fallon betrayed that philosophy when he said, you know, I don't care if she knew. I would have gone over to Russia and helped him with
to Europe, yes, and helped them myself.
That was amazing.
Exactly. It's like, okay, so basically you're laying your feelings and methods bare.
It's okay now, as long as they're doing it.
As long as your guy gets elected, it's fine.
Right.
Ethics be damned. Not really. Very ethical on the couch. And we are also
That's what
waiting.
They say, not what you say.
No, sir.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. We are awaiting the White House press briefing, a new reaction to the indictments and Robert Mueller's Russia probe. And also, former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort's initial appearance in court. That's coming up. We'll bring all that to you live. Now, in the meantime, special counsel Robert Mueller facing new questions over his potential conflicts in the Russia probe, particularly his role at the FBI. When the controversial Russia uranium one deal went down during the Obama administration. Is it time for Mueller himself to face some questions? We will debate that ahead from the couch. Stay here.
Monday with some breaking news. We're awaiting the White House press briefing on this big news day as we learn of the grand jury and special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation indicting former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his business associate Rick Gates. This comes as Mueller faces growing questions over his credibility leading the probe and potential conflicts of interest. Lawmakers, including New York Congressman Peter King, say Mueller should testify about his role as FBI director during the controversial Russia uranium deal approved under the Obama administration. Here it is. Watch.
I think there are issues here which he's going to have to address, because it is going to involve the investigation of what the FBI was doing and not doing at a critical time during our relationship with Russia when he was head of the FBI.
I think that he has to be very, very careful about making sure that the public believes that he has no conflicts and that his integrity is unquestioned. So I think it's incumbent upon him to hold himself to the highest possible standards so that people in this country can have absolute confidence in the decisions he comes to in this investigation.
David?
Well, let's be clear about what happened. Uranium One was sold to Rosatom. I don't know how you pronounce these Russian names, but Rosatom is the government-related nuclear energy facility in Russia.
I like yours better. I call it Rosatom.
Rosatom? Okay.
I know
Rosatom basically is a corrupt enterprise. At least pieces of it were corrupt, including primarily the piece that involved its relations with United States uranium concerns. The head of that enterprise was Vadim Mikarin. From 2009 to 2012, he was involved in a series of corrupt practices, including bribery, kickbacks, you name it. He was racketeering. He actually was convicted in 2015, sent to 2 years in jail for what he did, and he was in charge of all Rosatom's operations, uranium operations in the United States. So one must assume this is a corrupt enterprise. Why the United States would agree to selling 20% of our uranium reserves to an organization that they know, that the FBI knows is involved in corrupt activities, is beyond me.
Can I stop you for just 1 second? I want to ask you this, Kennedy, because we've seen the numbers move on this. We've seen 20%, we've seen more like 11%. I think I've heard you say that, Katie. What really matters when it comes to the percentage?
Well, I think what matters is not necessarily the percentage, because, you know, there are some who point out that the United States really doesn't produce that much uranium. So even if it was only a fraction of our market, that's a teeny tiny fraction of the world market. The point is the Russians were trying to get that uranium, and they were doing whatever they could, including the operative that you were talking about, who was working directly with the Kremlin at Rosatom. And he took a very soft plea deal. And they knew that he was guilty of much more than money laundering, and he was threatening people. There was extortion, there were kickbacks, there was a uranium trucking company. The head of that company was also caught up in a plea deal around the same time. But my question is, if you know they're shady, and having uranium could be a national security issue, then why let this deal go forward without much more?
Why is the U.S. government doing a shady deal? So, Sandra, I want to talk to you about this conflict of interest real quick. The New York Post columnist Michael Goodwin put this out. He said, any honest probe must examine the Obama White House and Justice Department. Mueller served as head of the FBI for more than 4 years under President Obama and cannot be expected to investigate his former colleagues and bosses. But without that necessary step, his work would be incomplete at best. So it's time for him to say bye-bye.
Yeah, and his piece was titled Mueller Should Resign. So his point is that he's compromised and he cannot conduct a fair and independent investigation. But then you have pretty much everyone who's worked with Mueller along the way who have a lot of respect for him, speak very highly of him. And is this a man who would have taken this role on if he knew he couldn't conduct a fair investigation?
Yeah, he didn't have to do this. He didn't have to come out of retirement, essentially, and get involved and have his character impugned. I think that we should let him do his job. He's not going to be popular on either side of the aisle. When he goes after Donald Trump and the Trump campaign, it's unpopular politically. When he goes after the Clinton campaign, those same people cheer. So when you walk into DOJ, the security there is actually much tighter than it is at the White House. And it's because they are very unpopular and they make decisions that affect people's lives. They put people in prison and they're unpopular on both sides, despite your political leanings. So I'm not going to impugn Bob Mueller's character. I think we tend to do that a lot now. It's an easy, lazy argument to make. And I think he should finish his work, and we'll see what happens, and we'll see the facts.
Do you think he's going to go after Uranium One and fusion?
I'm not going to say specifically Uranium One, but I do think that he is looking at the wider situation with the campaigns.
Far, leads you to believe that he's going to go down those avenues that the evidence points to potentially. One other thing, too, though, but for the White House, if they want to see this come to a close, you've got to let this play out.
Right.
I mean, if you preempt it at this point, it just makes it go on that much further. Right. All right, we're moving on. Speaking of the White House, a press briefing coming up. This will be an important one. The first time we'll hear from the White House on the record since the indictments have come down against Paul Manafort and a business associate. Former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort to make his initial court appearance in the next hour as well on charges including money laundering. The White House reaction live when it happens right here on Fox.
More Outnumbered in just a moment, but first, let's touch base with Harris on what's coming up on Outnumbered Overtime in just a few moments. Hey, Harris.
It literally is just a few minutes from now that we're going to see, we anticipate, the daily White House press briefing. This hour, also, the initial court appearance by former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort, who was indicted, as you know, by a federal grand jury that was unsealed today. 12 counts against him in special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. We'll get into the legal and political fallouts with my guest, the RNC's Kayleigh McEnany, and more on Overtime atop the hour. Now back to you, Sandra.
All right, thanks, Harris. We'll be watching. We're indeed awaiting that White House press briefing and fresh reaction to the big news today that former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his longtime business associate have been indicted in the Russia probe led by Robert Mueller. Manafort facing 12 counts, including money laundering and making false statements. Mueller's team also revealing today that a Trump campaign advisor has already pleaded guilty to lying to FBI agents during questioning. All that, the latest signs that Mueller is accelerating the Russia probe. Take that all in. We wait for the White House briefing in a few moments. David, what do you expect is going to be the biggest question from the press?
Well, the biggest question will probably be, did Donald Trump have any knowledge whatsoever of anything that Paul Manafort was involved with, dealing with Russia and their Ukrainian allies, which is who they were working for. Essentially, they were all working for Putin. I mean, the Ukrainian party that Manafort was working for Putin. But the key that I think Sarah is going to say is, hey, as long as we're dealing with not only looking at whether Republicans were involved with Russia, but also whether Fusion GPS was involved in Russia, whether the Uranium One deal was involved directly in Russian manipulation here in the United States. That's fair game. It's all fair game in terms of Russia trying to screw up our democratic system. That's what they've been interested in doing from the get-go, and that's what all these things indicate to me.
Following the indictment of Paul Manafort, Katie, what do you expect the messaging from the White House to be in a few minutes?
Well, I actually want to address some of the questions that might come from the reporters. There's some report, they follow them on Twitter, obviously, but some of them are wondering why the White House visitor logs have not been updated. I think they'll probably ask if Paul Manafort has stopped by the White House to have any conversations about this situation. But there is a lot of acknowledgement that the indictment, as we've talked about, on Manafort and Gates does not mention the campaign. That doesn't mean that the White House won't be asked to respond and comment on it. But I think probably and assume that Sarah Sanders will come out and refer all questions to the Office of the Special Counsel because it's not their problem to deal with.
Kennedy?
Well, you know, a part of the yardstick of how good a leader is going to be is how good is the initial campaign. And I think that, you know, this Trump campaign for president should have done a better job of vetting people like Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort. But that's why Paul Manafort wanted the job, because he knew that he was so scummy and disgusting that a campaign with virtually no political experience would only be the one foolish enough to hire someone like him.
They might throw him under the bus. I mean, they may at this point go, we got to wash our hands clean of Manafort. And
but they did already.
Him.
They fired him in August 2016.
Yeah, the president has said he's still a good guy, but I haven't talked to him in a long time.
By the way, for a split second there, you see the live shot at the White House. You saw John Roberts, our very own John Roberts, for a split second. He's likely setting up to give a report at the top of the hour. You'll see that with Harris in just a few moments. Meanwhile, more Outnumbered when we come back in just a moment. All right, there just was not enough going on here today. David Asman.
This was a perfect day to have me. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
So great
Fun
to
day.
see you.
And by the way, we can catch you at 4 p.m. on the Fox Business Network.
Indeed, yeah, with Melissa Francis.
Yeah, and Miss Kennedy as well.
Yep,
8 p.m. tonight, we'll be tackling this stuff with gusto.
We'll
All right, we're back here tomorrow at noon Eastern. Join us every weekday at noon. Outnumbered Overtime with Harris Faulkner starts right now.